The peace that never was, the diplomatic cruiser. New Horizons emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Corvin system, its sleek hull reflecting the amber light of the triple-star configuration. Ambassador David Chen stood on the bridge, his weathered, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the world that would either herald a new era of peace or become humanity's greatest diplomatic failure. After 30 years of service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this mission felt different. The Corvins had been the dominant military force in the outer spiral for 3 centuries. Their empire stretched across 47 star systems, each conquered through a combination of overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency. When they had unexpectedly extended an invitation for diplomatic talks to Earth, the entire human government had been suspicious. Yet here David stood, representing not just Earth but all of humanity's colonial worlds, ready to negotiate what could be the most important treaty in human history. Captain Lisa Walker approached him from her command station, her expression carefully neutral. She had commanded the New Horizons for 5 years, and in that time she had developed a sixth sense for trouble. The Corvins were being too accommodating, too eager to please. Their usual arrogance seemed replaced by an almost desperate friendliness that set off every alarm in her military-trained mind. The descent to the planet's surface was smooth, almost ceremonial. Corvin fighters flanked the human shuttle in what they claimed was an honor guard formation, though David noticed how their weapons remained powered and locked onto his vessel. The capital city of Corvathia sprawled beneath them like a metallic spiderweb, its buildings rising in twisted spirals that defied conventional architecture. Everything about Corvin design spoke of dominance and intimidation, from their towering structures to the way their streets funneled visitors toward the central government complex. Supreme Regent Zalthax waited at the landing platform, his arms spread in what the briefing materials had described as a gesture of welcome. The Corvin leader stood 9 feet tall, his exoskeleton gleaming with ceremonial oils that caught the light from the 3 suns. Behind him, a delegation of military officers and government officials formed precise rows, their compound eyes focused, unblinkingly on the arriving humans. David stepped from the shuttle with measured confidence, flanked by his small team of advisors and security personnel. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, his security chief, had protested bringing only 6 guards, but diplomatic protocol limited their armed presence. They were here for peace, after all, not to start a war. The irony of that thought would haunt the survivors for years to come. The initial ceremonies proceeded according to plan. Zalthax spoke of a new age of cooperation, of the benefits that could come from human-Corvin partnership. His words were translated perfectly by the universal translators, but David had spent enough time studying alien cultures to recognize the subtle signs of deception, the way Zalthax's secondary arms twitched when he spoke of peace, the slight discoloration in his neck plates that indicated stress in Corvin physiology. All of it suggested that the Supreme Regent was playing a role. The formal negotiations were scheduled to begin the following day, but tradition demanded a unity ceremony first. It was an ancient Corvin ritual, supposedly dating back thousands of years to when their various hive clans first united under a single banner. Participants would share a ceremonial meal and exchange gifts to demonstrate their commitment to peaceful coexistence. David had brought a piece of earth marble, carved with symbols representing humanity's journey to the stars. It seemed almost quaint compared to the elaborate preparations the Corvins had made. The ceremony hall was magnificent, even by Corvin standards. Crystalline columns rose hundreds of feet to support a transparent dome that offered a view of the night sky and the system's 3 moons. Thousands of Corvin citizens had gathered to witness this historic moment, their chittering voices creating a constant background hum that the translators couldn't quite parse. David took his position at the center of the hall, where a raised platform had been prepared for the exchange of gifts. As Zalthax approached with the ceremonial chalice, David felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something in the crowd had changed. The chittering had stopped, replaced by an anticipatory silence that pressed against his eardrums. He glanced toward Mitchell, who had noticed it too. The security chief's hand moved imperceptibly toward his sidearm, a gesture that would prove futile in the seconds to come. The attack came from multiple directions simultaneously. The ceremonial guards, who were supposed to be purely decorative, raised weapons that had been disguised as traditional staffs. The first plasma bolt took David in the chest, burning through his diplomatic robes and the light armor beneath. As he fell, he saw Mitchell and two other guards cut down before they could draw their weapons. His advisor, Sarah Kim, tried to shield him with her body, only to be vaporized by a concentrated burst of energy. Through the chaos and pain, David heard Zalthak speaking, his voice carrying clearly over the sounds of violence. The translator in David's ear, somehow still functioning, rendered the words in perfect, horrible clarity. The human threat ends here. Their expansion stops with the death of their voice. Let the galaxy know that the Corvin Empire bows to no one. David's last thought as darkness claimed him was not of fear or anger but of pity. The Corvins had no idea what they had just unleashed. Humanity had offered them friendship, and they had chosen war. They would learn, as others had before them, that humans had a very different approach to warfare than most species. He died, with Sarah's hand in his, her final act one of compassion rather than violence. Above the planet, Captain Walker watched her tactical display light up with weapon signatures. The ceremonial hall had become a killing field, and her sensors showed no human life signs remaining. The Corvins had jammed communications during the attack, but her ship's advanced sensors had recorded everything. She had evidence of the betrayal, proof that this had been planned from the beginning. The escort fighters that had seemed honorary were now moving into attack positions around her ship. Walker didn't wait for them to fire first. The New Horizons might have been a diplomatic vessel, but it was still a human ship, which meant it was armed with weapons that most species considered excessive for anything short of a battleship. Particle beams lanced out, cutting through two Corvin fighters before they could react. The ship's point defense systems, designed to look like standard navigation arrays, revealed themselves as the plasma cannons they really were. The brief battle in orbit lasted less than 3 minutes. The Corvins had expected an easy kill, a HFY diplomatic vessel with minimal armament. They got a reminder that humans had learned long ago to never go anywhere unprepared. Walker jumped her ship to hyperspace before the Corvin fleet could respond, carrying with her the recordings that would change everything. Within hours, the Corvin Empire broadcast their version of events to the Galactic Assembly. They claimed that Ambassador Chen had attempted to assassinate the Supreme Regent during the Unity ceremony, that the humans had come not in peace, but as conquerors. They presented fabricated evidence, doctored recordings that showed human security forces opening fire first. The speed and coordination of their propaganda campaign revealed that this had been planned for months, possibly years. The Galactic Assembly, always eager to maintain stability, issued cautious statements calling for calm and investigation. Many species, particularly those who had suffered under human economic competition, were quick to believe the Corvin narrative. Others, who had dealt with humans more directly, remained skeptical, but silent. The political calculation was clear. The Corvins were too powerful to challenge without proof, and even with proof, who would stand against them? Earth's response surprised everyone. There were no immediate threats of retaliation, no fleet mobilization, no angry demands for justice. Instead, President Maria Santos appeared before the United Earth Council and delivered a speech that would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. She spoke of David Chen's dedication to peace, of humanity's desire for cooperation, and of the sadness that filled human hearts at this betrayal. She announced that Earth would be withdrawing from several trade agreements and closing certain diplomatic channels, but these seemed like token gestures rather than real consequences. 30. Corvin celebrated what they saw as human weakness. Zalthax proclaimed that the incident proved humanity's unsuitability for galactic leadership, that they were too soft, too emotional to compete with the true powers of the galaxy. He had no idea that every word he spoke was being recorded, analyzed, and added to a file that grew larger by the day. Humanity was not weak, they were patient. They were not retreating, they were preparing. In secret facilities across human space, Analysts pored over every piece of data from the assassination. They identified every Corvin involved, traced every financial transaction that had funded the operation, mapped every connection between the conspirators. The humans did what they did best. They learned. They studied their enemy with the dedication of a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, and nuclear war. They prepared a response that would not just punish the Corvins, but would fundamentally reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The first phase was already in motion. Human merchants began quietly withdrawing from Corvin markets, citing regulatory concerns or supply chain issues. It seemed like a minor inconvenience at first, barely worth noticing. The Corvins didn't realize that humans had spent decades becoming integral to the galactic economy, their fingers in every pie, their technology underpinning systems that billions relied on. The withdrawal was surgical, precise, designed to cause maximum damage while appearing accidental. Captain Walker, meanwhile, had delivered her evidence to Earth's Strategic Command. The recordings were crystal clear. The Corvins had planned and executed a premeditated assassination of a diplomatic envoy during a peace ceremony. Under galactic law, this was not just a crime, but an act of war. However, humanity chose not to present this evidence immediately. They had learned that in galactic politics, timing was everything, and the right moment had not yet arrived. The reckoning 6 months after Ambassador Chen's assassination, the Corvin Empire was experiencing what their economists called minor technical difficulties. Trade routes that had functioned smoothly for decades were suddenly plagued by delays. Critical components for their manufacturing base became scarce. Food shipments arrived late or spoiled. Each incident had a perfectly reasonable explanation, but taken together, they formed a pattern that only a few Corvin analysts began to recognize. The truth was far more devastating than they imagined. Over the past century, humanity had done what no other species had thought to do. They had made themselves indispensable. While other races had focused on military might or territorial expansion, humans had quietly embedded themselves in the galaxy's infrastructure. They ran the most efficient shipping companies, produced the most reliable technology, and operated the financial systems that kept interstellar commerce flowing. When they began their withdrawal, it wasn't an attack. It was simply the removal of a foundation that the Corvins hadn't realized they were standing on. Director Marcus Webb sat in his office on Luna, Earth's moon, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. The Strategic Response Division had been activated the moment Chen died, and Webb had been orchestrating humanity's retaliation ever since. Unlike traditional warfare, this campaign left no bodies, no destroyed cities, no dramatic battles. It was warfare evolved to its most refined form, the complete dismantling of an enemy's ability to function as a civilization. The second phase began with information. Human intelligence services, which most species didn't even know existed, began releasing carefully curated data to specific individuals within the Corvin Empire. Mid-level bureaucrats suddenly discovered that their superiors had been embezzling funds. Military officers learned that their rivals had been sabotaging their careers. Every fracture in Corvin society, every hidden resentment and suppressed ambition was identified and exploited. The humans didn't create these weaknesses, they simply revealed them. Then came the psychological component. Human media companies, which had entertainment contracts throughout the galaxy, began producing content that subtly questioned Corvin leadership. It wasn't propaganda in any obvious sense, just stories that happened to feature corrupt leaders who resembled certain Corvin officials, documentaries about historical betrayals that paralleled recent events, news programs that asked uncomfortable questions about economic indicators. The Corvins tried to ban this content, but it had already spread through quantum networks that couldn't be shut down without crippling their own communication systems. The true masterstroke came when humanity revealed the existence of their witness, protocol. For 50 years, humans had been placing observers throughout the galaxy. These weren't spies in any traditional sense. They were anthropologists, historians, and record keepers. They had been documenting everything, Every treaty violation, every hidden atrocity, every backroom deal that violated galactic law. When humanity began releasing this information, it wasn't just the Corvins who panicked. The Galactic Assembly called an emergency session when evidence surfaced that Zalthax had been planning to assassinate representatives from 3 other species after eliminating humanity's diplomatic presence. The recordings Captain Walker had made were finally presented, but they were just one piece of a massive puzzle that showed the Corvin Empire as a threat to galactic stability. Species that had remained neutral suddenly found reasons to support humanity's position. Zalthax appeared before the assembly, his forearms gesturing wildly as he denied the accusations. But for every denial, humanity produced evidence. For every excuse, they had recordings. They had spent 6 months building an airtight case, and now they presented it with the methodical precision of a species that had invented the concept of justice through law rather than force. The economic collapse accelerated. Corvin colonies began experiencing food shortages as human agricultural technology, which they had licensed but never learned to maintain, began failing. Their military vessels, dependent on human-designed navigation systems, found themselves unable to plot accurate hyperspace jumps. Their entire financial system, built on quantum encryption algorithms that humans had helpfully provided, suddenly developed compatibility issues that froze assets and prevented transactions. It was Admiral Chen Ling, David's daughter, who delivered humanity's formal response to the assassination. She stood before the Galactic Assembly in full military dress uniform, her voice steady as she spoke. The Corvin Empire asked us what humanity would do when pushed. They wondered if we were weak because we chose diplomacy over war. Today they have their answer. We did not fire a single shot. We did not destroy a single city. We simply stopped helping them destroy themselves. The revelation that followed shocked even humanity's allies. Every major Corvin military installation had been infiltrated by human observers. Not spies, not saboteurs, but witnesses. They had been there for years, documenting everything, preparing for a day that humanity had hoped would never come. When the Corvins had killed David Chen, they had activated a protocol that turned these observers into something far more dangerous: teachers. These humans began offering their services to Corvin citizens who wanted to escape the collapsing empire. They taught them human agricultural techniques, human manufacturing processes, human governmental systems. They didn't force anyone to abandon their culture. They simply offered alternatives. Within weeks, entire Corvin colonies were declaring independence, choosing to align themselves with Earth rather than remain part of an empire that had led them to ruin. Zalthax's final stand came when he threatened to use planet-killer weapons against human colonies. It was an empty threat and everyone knew it. The moment he made it, human special forces teams, who had been positioned throughout Corvin space for months, disabled every weapon of mass destruction in the Empire. They didn't destroy them. That would have been an act of war. They simply removed critical components, leaving the weapons intact but useless. The message was clear. Humanity could have destroyed the Corvin Empire at any time. They had chosen not to. The Supreme Regent's own guards arrested him when evidence surfaced that he had been planning to flee with the Empire's treasury, leaving his people to face the consequences of his actions alone. The trial that followed was broadcast throughout the galaxy, with humanity insisting on complete transparency. Every crime was documented, every victim named, every consequence explained. It wasn't vengeance, it was education. The new Corvin government, formed from reform-minded officials who had opposed the assassination, immediately sued for peace. Humanity's terms were surprisingly generous. Full reparations to David Chen's family and the families of the other victims, reformation of Corvin military doctrine to defensive purposes only, and integration into human-monitored trade networks that would prevent future economic manipulation. There were no territorial concessions, no humiliating surrender ceremonies, no occupation forces. President Santos explained humanity's position in her address to the galaxy. We could have destroyed them. Our military commanders presented 17 different scenarios for the complete annihilation of the Corvin Empire. We chose none of them, not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to choose mercy. David Chen died believing in peace. We honor his memory not through vengeance, but through the peace he died trying to create. The transformation of the Corvin Empire into the Corvin Federation took 3 years. Human advisors worked alongside Corvin reformers to rebuild their economy, restructure their government, and reintegrate them into galactic society. It was the most successful rehabilitation of a defeated enemy in galactic history, and it sent a message that resonated throughout known space. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their ability to turn enemies into allies. The Galactic Assembly voted unanimously to create new laws protecting diplomatic envoys, laws that came to be known as the Chen Protocols. Any attack on a diplomatic representative would trigger automatic sanctions from all member species, enforced by humanity's economic networks. The galaxy had learned that humans took their diplomats seriously, not because they were weak, but because diplomacy was their first choice. Their last choice was something no one wanted to see again. Years later, a young Corvin historian would write, "The humans defeated us completely without firing a shot in anger. They dismantled our empire, rebuilt our society, and somehow left us grateful for it. They showed us that true strength isn't in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to choose not to. When they said they came in peace, we should have believed them. When we chose war instead, we learned why they preferred peace, not because they couldn't wage war, but because they had evolved beyond the need for it." The memorial to Ambassador David Chen stands in the center of New Geneva, Earth's diplomatic capital. It's a simple stone monument with an inscription in every known language. He died believing in peace. We live to make his belief reality. Every year on the anniversary of his death, representatives from across the galaxy gather to renew their commitment to the Chen Protocols. The Corvin delegation always arrives first and stays latest, a permanent reminder of the price of choosing violence over diplomacy. Captain Lisa Walker, promoted to admiral for her actions during the crisis, would later write in her memoirs, "People ask me if I wanted revenge for David's death. Of course I did. But revenge would have dishonored everything he stood for. Instead, we gave the galaxy something far more powerful than revenge. We gave them a demonstration of what humanity could do when pushed to the brink. And then we pulled back, because that's what makes us human. Not our capacity for destruction, but our choice to build instead." The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity. They were not warriors who had learned diplomacy, but diplomats who had mastered war so thoroughly that they no longer needed to wage it. When the Corvins killed their ambassador, they expected retaliation. They got something far worse. They got to see what humanity was truly capable of, and then they had to live with the knowledge that humans had chosen to spare them. The new age of peace that followed was built not on fear of human military might, but on respect for human restraint. Species across the galaxy began to understand that when humans offered friendship, it was genuine. When they extended their hand in peace, it was sincere. And when that hand was slapped away, as the Corvins had done, the response would be measured, calculated, and utterly devastating. Not to bodies or buildings, but to the very foundations of those who chose violence. In the end, humanity's vengeance for their assassinated ambassador wasn't vengeance at all. It was education. They taught the galaxy that evolution didn't stop with biology. It extended to warfare, to diplomacy, to the very nature of civilization itself. And humanity, the youngest species in the Galactic Assembly, had evolved further than any of them had imagined possible.